Amara's suitcase hit the pavement before the funeral flowers had stopped trembling on the gate. The black case landed on its side with a hard plastic crack, scattering a pair of worn shoes and her father's folded gray sweater across the sun-baked driveway. Behind her, the 6-foot iron gate of the Okoye family home stood open just wide enough for Chinedu to fill the space. His charcoal funeral suit was still buttoned. A white memorial ribbon hung from his lapel. The afternoon heat pressed against Amara's skin, thick with the smell of lilies, dust, and incense drifting from the house where mourners had been praying less than 20 minutes earlier. "Pick it up," Chinedu said. His voice was low, but the relatives gathered beneath the front awning heard every word. Amara bent slowly and lifted the sweater before its sleeve touched the dirt. She pressed the fabric against her chest for 1 second, then folded it again. "I need my things from upstairs." Chinedu slid a new brass key into the lock. Click. The sound was small, final. "Those are your things." Amara looked past him. Through the gate, sunlight flashed across the cream-colored walls of the house where she had slept for years, cooked her father's meals, counted out his medicine, and sat beside his bed when the rest of the family stopped answering late-night calls. Her room was still upstairs. Her documents were there. Her clothes were there. And inside her father's study sat the little wooden box he had told her never to throw away. "You changed the locks during the funeral?" she asked. A few relatives shifted their feet against the warm tile. Someone's bracelet clinked. No one stepped forward. Chinedu removed the key and slipped it into his pocket. "This house belongs to the family now. You don't get to stay here because you played nurse for 3 years. Amara's fingers tightened around the sweater. She did not raise her voice. "Papa died 4 days ago." "Exactly." Chinedu glanced toward the relatives behind him, then back at her. "And some of us understand what happens next." The words brought a faint murmur from the doorway. Amara noticed her aunt turn her face away. She noticed her cousin staring at the scattered shoes instead of at her. She noticed something else, too. The old lock had not simply been replaced. The metal plate around it was fresh, bright against the darker iron, as though someone had ordered the work before the funeral was even over. Amara picked up the second shoe and placed it inside the suitcase. "Give me the wooden box from Papa's study." For the first time, Chinedu stopped smiling. It lasted less than a second, but Amara saw it. His thumb rubbed once across the new brass key in his palm. "There is no box." The heat seemed to sharpen around them. From somewhere inside the house came the scrape of a chair across marble, and the soft hum of the ceiling fans still running for guests who had already eaten and prayed and gone home. Amara stood. "I saw it yesterday." Chinedu stepped closer to the gate. "Then you should have taken it yesterday." He pulled the iron door toward him. Amara placed one hand against the warm metal before it closed. "Why are you doing this before Papa's estate has even been discussed?" Chinedu's jaw shifted. "Because there's nothing to discuss." "Has the lawyer said that?" Silence. Not grief. Not hesitation. Something tighter. Chinedu looked over his shoulder toward the house before answering. "You need to leave." Then he shut the gate. The latch struck metal with a heavy clang. Amara stood outside with her suitcase at her feet and her father's sweater over one arm, while the people who had called her family watched through the bars. A moment later, Chinedu turned the new key. Click. Locked. Amara reached into her handbag for her phone. The screen was hot from sitting beneath the sun. 3 missed calls glowed beneath a name she recognized from her father's papers. Barrister Tund Afolabi. Before she could decide whether to call back, the phone vibrated again. She answered. "Miss Okoye?" The lawyer's voice was clipped, urgent. Behind him came the muffled shuffle of paper. "Where are you?" Amara looked through the iron bars at Chinedu walking back toward the house. "Outside my father's home." There was a pause. Then Tund lowered his voice. "Do not sign anything your family gives you. And do not let anyone sell that house." Amara's hand went still around the phone. "Why?" Another sheet of paper moved on his end. Because I'm looking at a property deed your father instructed me to read after his funeral. Amara kept the phone pressed to her ear, while Chinidu disappeared behind the locked gate. A deed? She repeated. Across the street, a motorcycle coughed through traffic, and the late afternoon sun flashed against the brass lock her brother had installed before their father's funeral flowers had even begun to wilt. Barrister Tund Afalabi did not answer immediately. She could hear paper sliding across the desk, the dry whisper of thick legal pages turning under his hand. Your father left instructions, he said at last. That is all I can discuss until the family is properly notified. Amara looked down at the suitcase lying open beside her. Her father's gray sweater rested on top, carrying the faint scent of the cedar cabinet where he had kept it. Chinidu says there's nothing to discuss. Then Chinidu is speaking before the documents are read. The line went quiet for half a second. Do not sign anything. The call ended. Amara zipped the suitcase shut, raised the handle, and walked away from the gate instead of knocking again. The wheels rattled over cracks in the pavement. Behind the iron bars, Chinidu stood beneath the front portico watching her leave. He did not call after her. He only lifted his phone. 20 minutes later, Amara stepped into the small pharmacy where she had collected her father's prescriptions every month for nearly 3 years. Cool air from the ceiling unit brushed the sweat from her forehead. The room smelled of antiseptic, cardboard, and peppermint lozenges. The pharmacist, Mrs. Baligan, looked up from the counter and froze when she saw Amara still dressed in black. You came today? She asked softly. Amara placed a folded receipt on the counter. Papa had one balance left. Mrs. Balog stared at her. Amara, that can wait. He hated owing people. She counted the bills into the woman's hand. No speech. No tears. Just the last small obligation of a daughter who had spent years measuring tablets into plastic cups, setting alarms for midnight doses, and learning which foods her father could keep down when illness made everything taste like metal. Her phone buzzed against the counter. Chinidu. She let it ring once, then answered. Where are you? He demanded. The background behind him was loud with voices and the clatter of dishes. Family members were still inside the house, eating from funeral trays as if the day had already become an inheritance meeting. Finishing something for Papa. You need to stop saying that. Amara's thumb went still against the edge of the phone. Saying what? Acting like you were the only one who cared for him. Amara glanced at the pharmacy shelf where her father's name was still written on a white collection label. I didn't say I was. Good. Because being around him when he was sick doesn't give you ownership of his property. Mrs. Balog lowered her eyes and stepped toward the far end of the counter. Amara walked outside. Heat wrapped around her immediately, carrying the smell of fuel and roasted plantain from a roadside stand. I never asked for ownership. Then this should be easy. There was a rustle on Chinidu's end, followed by the sharper sound of paper being tapped against a table. I'm having something prepared. Amara stopped beside a concrete wall faded by years of sun. What? A family acknowledgement. You sign that you have no claim against the house, the cars, or anything Papa left behind. We give you some money, and everyone moves on. A bus rolled past, its engine growling hard enough to swallow the next few seconds. Amara waited until the noise faded. Why would I sign away something before the lawyer reads the estate? Chinidu exhaled through his nose. Because lawyers complicate simple things. Or because they make simple things official. Silence came from the other end. Then his voice changed. Lower. Colder. You think taking care of an old man makes you special? Amara gripped the suitcase handle. The textured plastic pressed into her palm. No, you cooked for him. You drove him to appointments. You slept in the room down the hall. Fine. That was your choice. Amara looked toward the road. 3 years compressed into ordinary objects. Medicine bottles, hospital parking receipts, clean sheets drying over the balcony rail, untouched bowls of soup cooling beside her father's bed. She said only, "And locking me out today was yours." This time Chinedu did not answer immediately. When he did, every word landed slowly. "I'll send the document tonight. Sign it by 9 tomorrow morning, and I'll let you collect the rest of your belongings. Refuse, and nothing of yours leaves that house." The call ended. Amara lowered the phone. A message arrived almost at once. One attachment, one deadline. She stared at it for 3 seconds, then pressed forward. Not to Chinedu, to Barrister Afolabi. Beneath the document, she typed 6 words. "My brother wants this signed tonight." Then she locked the screen, lifted her suitcase, and kept walking. By 7 the next morning, Chinedu had already begun giving away things that were not yet his. Amara learned this when a silver SUV rolled past her on the narrow street outside the modest guesthouse where she had spent the night, its polished hood catching the hard morning light. She knew the vehicle immediately. Their father had driven it every Sunday until his illness made climbing into the seat too difficult. Behind the wheel sat Chinedu's cousin Emeka, one hand resting casually on the leather steering wheel. Amara stepped toward the curb. "Emeka!" The SUV slowed. Cool air spilled through the half-open window, carrying the sharp scent of new car freshener. Emeka avoided her eyes. "Chinedu said Uncle wanted me to have it." Amara looked at the temporary folder lying on the passenger seat. "Papa never said that." Emeka swallowed, then pressed the accelerator. The tires hissed over dusty pavement, and the SUV disappeared into traffic. Amara did not chase it. She turned around, walked back inside, picked up her handbag, and called a ride to the family house. 40 minutes later, she stood once again before the black iron gate. The new brass lock glowed beneath the sun. From inside came the scrape of furniture, men's voices, and the hollow thump of boxes being carried across marble floors. Amara knocked once. Chinedu opened the smaller pedestrian gate wearing a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. No funeral ribbon now. No black jacket. "You were told not to come back unless you were ready to sign." Amara stepped through before he could close the gate. "And you were told not to sell the house." His jaw tightened. "I'm not selling it today. You gave Papa's SUV away. I reassigned it." Amara kept walking. The foyer was cooler than outside, but the air smelled different. Furniture polish, cardboard, dust stirred from shelves that had not been emptied in years. 2 men carried a framed painting toward the front door. On the dining table, their father's gold watch, cufflinks, and several velvet jewelry boxes had been arranged into neat piles. Beside them sat handwritten labels with family names. Amara stopped. "What is this?" Chinedu came in behind her. Taking care of the family. He picked up the gold watch and slipped it into his pocket. Papa would have wanted everyone settled quickly. Amara reached for one of the labels. Her aunt's name was written beneath a box of jewelry. Another cousin had been assigned a generator. A younger nephew was receiving one of the cars. "The estate hasn't been read. You keep saying that like it changes who we are." Chinedu pulled a folder from beneath the table. Paper rasped against polished wood. "I am the eldest son. I have handled family matters since before you knew what a mortgage was." Amara looked toward the staircase. A stack of sealed boxes sat near the bottom step. Her name was written across 2 of them in thick black marker. "Did you pack my room?" "Yesterday." She crossed the foyer and lifted the lid of the first box. Clothes, shoes, nursing manuals from years earlier. The second held toiletries, photographs, and a cracked ceramic mug her father had bought her on her 25th birthday. She searched both boxes. "Where are my documents? Whatever belonged to you was packed. My passport isn't here. My certificates aren't here. Neither is the wooden box from Papa's study." Chinedu's voice sharpened. "Forget that box." Amara straightened. Around them, the workers slowed without stopping. Tape tore from a dispenser with a dry ripping sound. Somewhere upstairs, a drawer slammed. "Why?" she asked. "Because you've already taken enough from this family." Chinidu said it loudly now, loud enough for everyone in the foyer to hear. 3 years living here without rent, food, electricity. Papa paying your expenses while you stayed home pretending sacrifice made you important. Amara stared at him across the dining table. "I left my job to care for him. Your choice. You asked me to." Chinidu's eyes flickered. Amara continued before he could answer. "You said your business was too demanding. You said our sisters had children. You said someone had to stay." The room went still except for the ceiling fan clicking above them. Chinidu placed both palms on the table. "And Papa supported you while you did it. That was your share." Amara reached into her handbag, removed the unsigned family acknowledgement he had sent the night before, and laid it beside their father's watch box. Then she tore it cleanly in half. The sound was soft, almost delicate. Chinidu stared at the 2 pieces. Amara pushed them toward him. "You don't get to decide what my share was." His face hardened. He turned toward the workers and pointed at the boxes marked with her name. "Put those outside." Amara did not move. "And her documents?" one man asked. Chinidu looked directly at his sister. "Nothing else leaves this house." 10 minutes later, Amara stood beyond the locked gate again, 2 cardboard boxes at her feet instead of 1 suitcase. Behind the bars, Chinidu ordered the men back to work. Amara lifted the first box, then the second, and carried them to the waiting car without looking back. By the time she reached the rear door, her phone rang. Barrister Afolabi's name appeared on the screen. She answered. "Miss Okoye," he said. "The family meeting has been moved forward. Everyone will be in my office tomorrow morning." Amara looked at the gate where her belongings had just been thrown outside. "Good," she said. "Then tomorrow, he can say all of this in front of the lawyer." Barrister Afolabi's conference room smelled of leather, toner, and bitter coffee when Amara walked in the next morning with Chinidu already seated at the head of the table. Pale sunlight cut through the blinds in narrow stripes, catching dust above the polished mahogany surface. Chinidu wore a navy suit and a silver watch Amara recognized immediately. Their father's watch. He rested that wrist beside a thick cream folder as if the room already belonged to him. Their 2 sisters sat farther down the table, along with Aunt Ngozi and another uncle, but every chair seemed angled toward Chinidu. Amara placed her handbag beside the empty seat opposite him and sat without speaking. Barrister Afolabi entered carrying 2 document files, 1 blue and 1 black. His shoes tapped against the tile. "Before anyone distributes, transfers, sells, or signs away property," he said, "we need to establish what your father actually executed." Chinidu slid his cream folder across the table. "Then this should save us time." The folder stopped beneath the lawyer's hand. "Papa signed these months ago. I'm authorized to manage the estate." Amara watched Afolabi open it. Paper whispered against paper. Outside the sealed windows, a car horn sounded faintly from the street, but inside the room the only other noise was the slow hum of the air conditioner. Afolabi adjusted his glasses and read the first page. Then the second. Then he went back to the first. Chinidu leaned back. "As you can see, he wanted the eldest son handling the property." Afolabi did not answer. He reached for the blue file he had brought in and removed another document. "When did your father sign this?" he asked. "About 6 months ago." "Where?" "At home." "Who was present?" Chinidu's chair creaked beneath him. "Why does that matter?" Afolabi turned one of the papers around. "Because your father signed documents in this office for nearly 20 years. He placed a second page beside it. "And I keep copies." Amara did not lean forward. She kept her hands folded in her lap, but her eyes moved between the 2 signatures at the bottom of the pages. One was compact, the letters pressed close together with a long downward stroke beneath the surname. She knew that signature. She had watched her father write it on checks, hospital forms, birthday cards, even the delivery slips he insisted on signing himself. The signature on Chinidu's document was wider, looser. The final stroke curved upward instead of down. Chinidu picked up the paper. He was sick. Illness can change handwriting, Afolabi said. He lifted his coffee cup but did not drink. It does not automatically make a document invalid. Chinidu gave a small nod, almost triumphant. Then Afolabi added, but inconsistencies require verification. The smile vanished. Amara turned toward her brother. You said there was nothing to discuss. Chinidu dropped the page onto the table. There isn't. Then why bring your own paperwork before the lawyer reads Papa's? Chinidu's fingers tightened around the edge of the folder. Because someone has to protect this family from people who suddenly become interested in property. Amara's gaze moved to the silver watch on his wrist. You changed the locks before he was buried. You gave away his SUV before this meeting. You packed my room. Which one of us suddenly became interested in property? Aunt Ngozi shifted in her chair. A bracelet clicked against the tabletop. Chinidu stood. The chair legs scraped sharply across the tile. Enough! Afolabi closed the cream folder. The sound was quiet, but it stopped everyone. No, Mr. Okoye. Not enough. He pulled the folder toward his side of the table. Until I verify this document against the original records, nobody transfers another asset. Nobody removes another item from the house. And nobody sells that property. Chinidu stared at him. You can't freeze my father's house because my sister is making accusations. Your sister did not make the discrepancy. Afolabi tapped the two signatures once with his index finger. The paper did. Chinidu looked across the table at Amara. For the first time since the funeral, the brass keys to the house were not in his hand. Afolabi opened his black file, removed a stamped notice, and slid it directly toward Chinidu. Return Amara Okoye's personal documents by 5 o'clock today, he said. And if one more asset leaves that house before this review is complete, I will formally notify every party involved in the estate. Chinidu did not touch the notice. Afolabi placed his palm over the black file containing their father's official papers. Tomorrow morning, he continued, we begin with the property records. At 4:37 that afternoon, Amara stood outside the Okoye house again, and this time the gate opened before she touched it. Chinidu waited on the other side with her passport and certificates tucked beneath one arm, the brass keys hanging from his index finger. The sun had dropped lower, throwing orange light across the cream walls, while the generator behind the house gave off a low mechanical hum and the smell of hot diesel drifted through the courtyard. Your documents, he said. He held them out, but when Amara reached for them, he pulled them back. First, we talk. Amara looked at the papers. Her passport was on top. One corner was bent. Barrister Afolabi said you had until 5. And it isn't 5. Chinidu stepped aside. Gomein. She entered, but only as far as the front patio. The stone beneath her shoes was still warm from the day. Inside the house, cardboard boxes remained stacked near the staircase, though the workers were gone. Funeral lilies drooped in tall glass vases, their sweet smell turning heavy in the closed air. Chinidu placed her documents on a wrought iron table between them and Saturday. You embarrassed me this morning. Amara stayed standing. The signatures embarrassed you. His mouth tightened. You always do that. Do what? Stand there quietly and make everyone else look cruel. Amara glanced through the open doorway. Their father's chair was visible in the living room, pushed against the wall to make space for the funeral guests. A white cloth still covered one armrest. You locked me outside the house before Papa was buried. Because somebody had to take control. Chinidu reached beneath the table and pulled out a brown envelope. This one was thicker than the document he had sent the night before. He placed it beside her passport. I'm giving you another chance. Amara did not touch it. Chinedu opened the flap himself and removed several sheets. You sign a full release. No claim against the house. No challenge to the estate. No interference with the cars or anything already distributed. Then he placed a bank draft on top. Amara looked at the number printed across it. It was more money than he had offered the night before. Enough for rent. Enough to restart her life. Enough to make leaving easy. And after I sign? She asked. You take your documents, whatever personal things are left upstairs, and we are done. A ceiling fan clicked steadily inside the doorway. Chinedu leaned back. You wanted independence. Here it is. Amara lifted the bank draft between two fingers. The paper was smooth and stiff. Why are you paying me to give up something you say I don't own? Chinedu's eyes stayed on hers. Because I don't want months of arguments. Then wait for the lawyer. Lawyers create arguments. You said that yesterday. She placed the draft back on the table. Chinedu's hand flattened over it. Do you know what happens if you keep pushing this? The family will remember you as the daughter who turned Papa's funeral into a property fight. Amara looked toward the locked front gate. The fresh brass plate caught the last hard strip of sunlight. You changed that lock while people were still bringing condolence food into this house. Because I knew exactly what would happen. What? Chinedu stood. The chair legs dragged against the stone. You would start believing that because you stayed here with him, you deserved more than the rest of us. Amara finally sat across from him. She picked up the release, read the first page, then the second. Chinedu watched closely. Sign it, he said. Take the money. Walk away before tomorrow turns ugly. Amara reached for the pen beside the envelope. Chinedu's shoulders loosened. She uncapped it, drew the papers toward her, and wrote across the signature line in large black letters. Refused. Then she did the same on every page. The scratch of the pen seemed louder than the generator. Chinedu stared at the ink. Amara slid the papers back across the table and took her passport and certificates. Tomorrow, she said, I'm going to hear what Papa actually left behind. She stood, placed the documents in her handbag, and walked toward the gate. Behind her, Chinedu's voice followed. If you walk out now, don't expect this family to welcome you back. Amara put her hand on the warm iron latch and opened it herself. You already locked me out once. She stepped through, turned to face him, and pulled the gate closed between them. Tomorrow we find out whether you had the right. At 9:08 the next morning, Amara stepped into Barrister Afolabi's office and found Chinedu standing beside the receptionist's desk before she had even given her name. Cold air rolled from the ceiling vents, carrying the smell of fresh coffee and printer toner, while the glass doors behind them muted the traffic outside to a distant metallic hum. Chinedu turned slowly. He wore the same navy suit from the day before, but their father's silver watch was gone from his wrist. Why are you here alone? He asked. Amara set her handbag against her side. Because I was asked to come. We were supposed to meet as a family. Tomorrow is the property review. She glanced toward Barrister Afolabi's closed office door. This is something else. Chinedu stepped between her and the hallway. There is nothing else. Before Amara could answer, Afolabi opened his door. His white shirt sleeves were rolled back, and a stack of files rested beneath one arm. Miss Okoye. Komein. Chinedu moved first. Whatever you need to discuss with her, you discuss with all of us. Afolabi stopped. The fluorescent light reflected across his glasses. That is not how confidential instructions work. She is part of the estate. And so are you. That does not give you access to every communication your father directed to another person. Chinedu's jaw tightened. Amara walked around him. This time he did not block her. Inside Afolabi's office, the curtains were half closed against the bright Lagos sun. A desk fan turned slowly beside a shelf of legal books, clicking every time its head reached the far left. Afolabi closed the door but did not lock it. Sit. Amara did. He remained standing. 3 weeks before your father died, he gave my office a sealed envelope addressed to you. Amara's fingers stopped against the leather armrest. I never received anything. That is the problem. Afolabi opened a thin delivery log and turned it toward her. My clerk attempted delivery to the family house 2 days before the funeral arrangements began. Amara looked at the entry. Her name, the address, the date. Beneath it, one short notation. Delivery refused. I was home that day. Afolabi nodded. I know. Amara looked up. Who refused it? Before he answered, the office door opened. Chinedu stood there. We're done with this. Afolabi's voice hardened. Close the door. Chinedu ignored him and looked at Amara. Papa was dying. People were coming and going. Couriers, church members, doctors. Not every envelope mattered. Amara stood. The fan clicked behind her. You refused it. I managed the house. It had my name on it. And I said it was not the time. Afolabi lifted the delivery log. The clerk recorded that a male family member refused acceptance and instructed him not to return. Chinedu's eyes stayed on Amara. I was protecting Papa from chaos. Papa sent it. You don't know what was inside. Neither did you. Chinedu stepped into the room. The polished floor squeaked beneath his shoe. Listen to me. This family is already turning against itself because you keep digging. Amara did not move. I was locked outside the house. My belongings were boxed up. Papa's property was handed out before the estate was read. Now I find out something addressed to me was deliberately kept away. Because you were not thinking clearly. You don't get to decide that. Afolabi crossed to a steel cabinet behind his desk and unlocked it. Metal clicked against metal. He removed a sealed cream envelope and placed it flat on the desk. Amara's full name was written across the front in her father's unmistakable handwriting. Chinedu's face changed. Not dramatically, just enough. His shoulders stiffened, and his eyes dropped to the envelope before returning to Amara. Don't open that here, he said. Afolabi looked at him. You have no authority to give that instruction. Chinedu pointed at his sister. If you open it, whatever happens next is on you. Amara reached across the desk and placed her hand over the envelope. The paper felt thick beneath her palm. She did not tear it open. Not yet. Instead, she looked directly at her brother. Tomorrow you wanted the family together. She lifted the envelope from the desk. Good. Then tomorrow, you can watch me open what Papa tried to give me before you locked me out. By 10 the next morning, every chair in Barrister Afolabi's conference room was occupied, and Amara was the only person no one greeted. The air conditioner pushed cold air across the polished table, but the room still carried the warm smell of perfume, coffee, and the faint incense clinging to black funeral clothes. Aunt Ngozi sat beside Chinedu. Their 2 sisters sat opposite him. 2 older relatives filled the remaining seats. Chinedu had arranged them all before Amara arrived. She saw it immediately. She placed the sealed cream envelope in front of her and sat down. Nobody looked at the envelope first. They looked at her. So this is what we have become, Aunt Ngozi said, turning a gold ring around her finger. Your father is barely in the ground, and we are sitting in a lawyer's office fighting over his house. Amara kept both hands flat on the table. I didn't distribute his property. Chinedu leaned back. His chair gave a soft leather creak. There. That tone. One of their sisters shook her head. Amara, you lived with Papa for 3 years. Nobody questioned it. Nobody asked what he gave you during that time. He gave me grocery money and money for his prescriptions. And a roof, Chinedu said. And food. And access. The word landed differently. Access. Amara's eyes moved to him. Say what you mean. Chinedu folded his hands. You were alone with him constantly. You handled his medication. You took him to appointments. You were there when documents came into the house. Aunt Ngozi clicked her tongue softly. A sick man can be influenced. The room became very still. Even the low traffic outside seemed farther away behind the thick glass windows. Amara looked at her aunt, then at Chinedu. You think I manipulated Papa? Chinedu did not answer directly. I think it is convenient that the daughter who stayed closest to him now suddenly has private envelopes and questions about property. Amara reached for the sealed envelope. Several eyes followed her hand. She lifted it, but instead of opening it, she slid it across the table toward Barrister Afolabi. Keep it. Chinedu frowned. Afolabi looked at her. You are sure? Until the property records are read. Amara sat back. Nobody can say I opened something privately and changed the story later. The move shifted the room. Chinedu's fingers stopped tapping. Aunt Ngozi looked toward him. Amara continued. And since everyone wants to talk about what happened while Papa was sick, we can. She opened her handbag and removed a thick bundle of ordinary paper. Pharmacy receipts, hospital parking slips, grocery bills, appointment cards. She placed them in the center of the table. The paper edges were soft from being handled for years. These are not inheritance documents. They are the things I kept because Papa liked knowing what was paid. Chinedu gave a short laugh. Receipts prove nothing. I agree. Amara pushed the stack toward him. They don't prove I deserve the house. They prove why I was there. She pulled out one more item. The cracked ceramic mug that had been packed into her box when Chinedu emptied her room. She set it beside the receipts. The small chip along its rim caught the fluorescent light. I did not ask Papa for property when he was alive. I am not asking for it now. Her sister leaned forward. Then why not sign the release? Amara turned to her. Because Chinedu asked me to surrender rights before anyone told me what those rights were. Afolabi's pen stopped moving. Chinedu leaned across the table. You are tearing this family apart over technicalities. Amara met his eyes. No. You locked me out before the estate was read. You gave away his SUV. You boxed my room. You withheld an envelope addressed to me. And then you offered me money to sign away whatever Papa left. The words did not rise. They did not need to. One by one, the relatives stopped looking at Amara and began looking at Chinedu. His palm flattened against the table. You want to humiliate me in front of everyone? I want the truth read in front of everyone. Chinedu stood so quickly his chair rolled backward and struck the wall with a dull thud. Fine. His voice sharpened. Then let us read everything. Let the lawyer put every document on this table and tell us exactly who owns what. Amara did not move. Barrister Afolabi reached for the black file beside him and rested both hands on it. That was already the plan. Chinedu stared at his sister across the table. Amara pushed the sealed envelope farther toward the lawyer and said, Good. No private deals. No family pressure. No locked gates. Read the property records in front of all of us. Barrister Afolabi broke the seal only after Chinedu said, Open it. And the room fell quiet enough to hear the blades slide beneath the cream paper. The air conditioner hummed above them, cold against Amara's bare forearms, while coffee cooled untouched beside the black file. Afolabi removed one folded sheet and a small brass key taped to its center. The key struck the mahogany table with a bright metallic click. Chinedu leaned forward. What is that? Afolabi unfolded the page. Amara recognized her father's handwriting before a single word was read. The letters were narrow, deliberate, pressed firmly into the paper. Afolabi read only the instruction relevant to the estate. Her father had directed Amara, in the presence of his lawyer, to open the locked lower drawer of his study desk before any final discussion of the house. Nothing was to be removed privately. Nothing was to be destroyed. Chinedu stood at once. There is no reason to go back there. Amara picked up the key, its ridged edge pressed into her palm. Then this should be quick. Less than an hour later, 2 cars stopped outside the Okoye house. Heat shimmered above the driveway. The iron gate gave a long groan as Chinedu unlocked it, and the smell of drying funeral flowers mixed with dust and diesel from the generator behind the wall. Afolabi entered first carrying the black legal file. Amara followed. Chinedu walked beside them, close enough that the brass house keys rattled in his hand with every step. Inside, the house felt stripped. Several paintings were gone. Empty rectangles marked the walls where sunlight had not faded the paint. The marble floor was cool beneath Amara's shoes, but the study at the end of the hallway held trapped heat and the dry smell of old paper, wood polish and medicine. Her father's heavy desk stood beneath the window. The top had been cleared. Chinedu crossed his arms. "You see? Nothing." Amara did not answer. She crouched beside the desk and found the narrow lower drawer almost hidden behind a carved wooden panel. She inserted the brass key. It resisted. She turned it harder. Click. Behind her, Chinedu shifted his weight. The drawer opened 3 inches before catching on something inside. Amara pulled again. A wooden box slid forward against the rails. The same dark box she had asked for at the gate after the funeral. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Amara looked over her shoulder. "You said there was no box." Chinedu's fingers closed around his house keys. "I didn't know where it was. You packed this room. Workers packed this room." Afolabi raised one hand. "Nobody touches anything except Amara." She lifted the box onto the desk. Its wood was rough at the corners, worn smooth along the lid where her father's fingers had handled it for years. Inside were no stacks of cash, no jewelry, no dramatic treasure. There were hospital receipts bound with rubber bands, property tax statements, maintenance invoices, photographs, and several envelopes arranged by date. Amara lifted the first photograph. Her father sat in a hospital wheelchair wearing the blue sweater she had bought him. Amara stood behind him, one hand on the chair. There was no Chinedu in the frame. The next photograph showed Amara beside him at home after a hospital discharge. The next showed her holding a birthday cake while he sat wrapped in a blanket. Beneath the photographs lay canceled checks made out to contractors who had repaired the house. Each carried her father's familiar downward signature. Afolabi compared one to the document Chinedu had presented. He said nothing, but he placed the 2 pages side by side. Chinedu moved toward the desk. "This proves nothing about ownership." "Nobody said it did," Amara replied. She continued through the box. A handwritten ledger listed household expenses for nearly 3 years. Beside dozens of entries, her father had written the same initials. AO paid. AO collected. AO hospital. AO present. Chinedu reached for the ledger. Afolabi caught it first. "I said nobody touches anything." The lawyer placed the book inside his black file. Then Amara found the final envelope. It was heavier than the others and marked property. Original records. Chinedu's hand hit the desk. "That stays here." The sharp sound echoed off the shelves. Afolabi looked at him over his glasses. "No. It comes with me." Chinedu stepped between the lawyer and the door. "This is my father's house." Afolabi tucked the envelope beneath his arm. "That is precisely what has not yet been established." He walked around Chinedu without asking permission. Amara closed the wooden box and carried it after him. At the study door, Afolabi stopped and turned back. "Until I examine these originals, you will make no decision involving this property." Chinedu stared at the envelope under the lawyer's arm. For the first time since he changed the locks, the documents that could decide who controlled the house were leaving through the gate without him. By noon the following day, Chinedu had turned the Okoye living room into a sales meeting. The funeral flowers were still wilting beside their father's portrait, their sweet, souring scent mixing with furniture polish and the hot metallic smell drifting from the generator outside. Bright sunlight poured through the tall windows and struck a stack of documents on the dining table. Beside them sat a sharply dressed real estate broker with a leather portfolio. while Aunt Ngozi and the rest of the family occupied the sofas as though they had been summoned to witness something already decided. Amara stopped just inside the doorway. "What is this?" Chinedu did not offer her a chair. He stood beneath their father's framed photograph with one hand resting on the back of the old leather armchair. Closure. The brass keys to the house lay on the table beside him. "We have a buyer interested in the property." Amara looked at the broker, then at her brother. "Barrister Afolabi told you not to sell anything." "He told us he was reviewing records." Chinedu picked up the top document. Paper snapped crisply beneath his fingers. "He did not say I had to let this house sit here while everyone waits for you to turn a family matter into a courtroom drama." The broker cleared his throat. "Mr. Okoye, perhaps I should step outside." "No," Chinedu's answer came quickly. "Stay. Everyone should hear this." Amara crossed the room and placed her handbag on the dining table. The wood was cool beneath her palm. "Then tell everyone why you're trying to sell a house whose ownership hasn't been confirmed." Chinedu smiled without warmth. "Because I am the eldest son, and because this family has spent enough time pretending your 3 years in this house made you more important than everyone else." Aunt Ngozi shifted on the sofa. One of Amara's sisters stared down at her phone. Nobody interrupted. Chinedu continued. "You lived here. You ate here. Papa paid the bills. Now he is gone, and suddenly every paper has become sacred because you think there might be something in it for you." Amara reached toward the stack of documents. Chinedu covered them with his hand. "Don't." She stopped. "Is that a sale agreement?" "A letter of intent. For the house. For the future of the family." Amara looked around the room. "The same family that watched you lock me outside after the funeral?" The broker's eyes moved toward the floor. The ceiling fan rotated above them with a soft mechanical tick. Chinedu lifted the brass keys and let them drop back onto the table. The metal struck wood with a hard click. "You keep returning to that gate as if being asked to leave makes you an owner." "No," Amara's voice stayed level. "I keep returning to it because you acted like an owner before anyone proved you were one." The room tightened. Chinedu pulled the letter of intent from beneath his palm, turned to the final page, and uncapped a fountain pen. "Then watch." Amara stepped forward. "Chinedu," he signed. One sweeping line. One deliberate stroke beneath his name. The pen scratched across the page while every person in the room watched him do exactly what the lawyer had warned him not to do. Chinedu pushed the paper toward the broker. "The buyer has until tomorrow at noon to confirm the deposit." Amara picked up her phone. "What are you doing?" he asked. She raised the camera and photographed the signed page before the broker could close the portfolio. Chinedu moved toward her. "Delete that." Amara stepped back. "No, this is private family business. You invited a broker." She took another photograph, this one showing Chinedu's signature, the property address, and the date. "It stopped being private when you tried to sell the house." Chinedu's hand closed around the back of a chair. "You think sending pictures to Afolabi changes anything?" Amara typed one message and attached both photographs. The soft whoosh of the sent message cut through the room. "We're about to find out." Chinedu stared at her phone. Then his own began ringing on the table. Barrister Afolabi's name appeared across the screen. Nobody moved. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Chinedu finally answered and put the phone to his ear. The broker closed his portfolio. Chinedu listened without speaking, and the confidence slowly drained from his posture. When the call ended, he lowered the phone. Amara did not ask what the lawyer had said. Chinedu told the room himself. "Everyone has to be at Afolabi's office at 9 tomorrow morning." His eyes stayed fixed on Amara. "He says nobody leaves until the property records are read." At 9:03 the next morning, Barrister Afolabi locked the conference room door and placed the Okoye property file in the center of the table. Cold air moved steadily from the ceiling vents, carrying the dry smell of paper, leather, and coffee, while sunlight cut through the blinds in thin gold bars across the mahogany surface. Amara sat opposite Chinidu. Between them lay nothing but 12 feet of polished wood, and the house neither one of them had yet been legally declared entitled to control. Chinidu arrived with the same real estate broker from the day before. The broker kept his portfolio closed on his lap. Aunt Ngozi and the other relatives filled the remaining chairs. No one spoke when Afolabi opened the black file. The metal rings inside snapped apart with a sharp click. "Yesterday," he said, "Mr. Chinidu Okoye signed a letter of intent involving the family residence despite my written instruction that no property be transferred while the records were under review." Chinidu leaned back. "A letter of intent is not a transfer." "Correct." Afolabi removed a stamped page. "Which is why I contacted the prospective buyer before any deposit was accepted." The broker turned toward Chinidu. Chinidu's fingers tightened around the arm of his chair. "You contacted my buyer?" The buyer was considering property whose legal ownership had not been established. Afolabi slid the stamped notice across the table. "The transaction is suspended." The paper stopped directly in front of Chinidu. A faint buzz from the fluorescent light filled the silence above them. Chinidu did not touch it. "You are exceeding your authority." Afolabi reached into the file again. "Then let us establish authority." He placed Chinidu's document on the left side of the table, the same document Chinidu had presented as proof that their father intended him to manage the estate. Beside it, he placed 3 official records taken from the envelope recovered from the study. Thick paper, government stamps, registration numbers. Each sheet made a soft slap against the wood. "I verified these records yesterday afternoon." Chinidu leaned forward. Amara stayed still. "The document you brought me," Afolabi continued, tapping Chinidu's page, "is not the final property instrument." Chinidu's head lifted. "It was signed by Papa. Whether that signature was properly executed remains under review. But even if we assume for this meeting that it was genuine, it does not do what you claimed." Afolabi turned the page toward the family. "It concerns administrative matters from an earlier period. It does not transfer ownership of the residence to you." Aunt Ngozi's bracelet stopped moving against her wrist. One of Amara's sisters whispered, "Then who owns it?" Afolabi did not answer. "Not yet." He took another document from the file and placed it face down. Chinidu stood. His chair rolled backward several inches, wheels whispering over the carpet. "This is ridiculous. I am the eldest son. I have handled that house since Papa became ill." Amara looked at him. "You handled it for 4 days after he died." Chinidu turned toward her. "I protected it. You changed the locks. Because somebody had to keep control. You gave away his SUV. Family property. You packed my room. You were no longer staying there. You tried to sell the house." Chinidu planted both hands on the table. "Because I believed I had the right." Afolabi's voice cut through the room. "Belief is not title." Chinidu looked at him. Afolabi reached across the table and held out his hand. "The house keys." Chinidu laughed once. Nobody joined him. "You cannot be serious. Until the registered owner is formally identified, you will not exercise exclusive control over the property." Afolabi kept his hand extended. "The keys." For several seconds, Chinidu did nothing. Then he reached into his pocket. Metal scraped softly against metal. He placed the brass key ring on the table. Afolabi picked it up and set it beside the black file. The same keys Chinidu had used to lock Amara outside were no longer in his possession. The broker quietly stood and moved his portfolio beneath his arm. Chinidu watched him leave without speaking. Afolabi waited until the door closed, then turned the face-down document over without lifting it from the table. Only the official seal was visible from where the family sat. His palm covered the section containing the registered owner's name. "This," he said, "is the controlling deed for the house. Every eye dropped to the paper. Chinidu's mouth opened, but Afolabi raised one finger. No assumptions. No interruptions. I will read the registration exactly as it appears. Amara's gaze moved from the deed to the brass keys beside it. Afolabi placed his thumb beneath the first line, drew one slow breath, and prepared to read the name that would decide who had actually possessed the right to lock that gate. Barrister Afolabi lowered his eyes to the deed, and the room seemed to shrink around the single line beneath his finger. The air conditioner pushed a cold stream across the table, stirring the corner of the stamped document, while somewhere beyond the blinds a truck horn groaned through morning traffic. Chinidu remained standing. Amara sat opposite him with her hands resting beside her handbag. The brass keys lay between them. Afolabi adjusted his glasses. The registered proprietor named on this deed is Amara Neka Okoye. Nobody moved. The ceiling vent hissed softly. Aunt Ngozi's ring slipped from between her fingers and struck the tabletop with a tiny metallic tap. Chinidu stared at the lawyer. Read it again. Afolabi did. Slowly this time. Amara Neka Okoye. Amara's fingers curled once against the edge of her chair. She looked down at the heavy paper. Her name was there in black ink beneath the official registration details, printed above the seal she had seen only moments earlier. Chinidu reached for the deed. Afolabi pulled it back before his hand touched it. This cannot be right. It is the controlling registered instrument. Papa owned that house. He did. Afolabi turned another page. Until he executed and registered the transfer. Chinidu gave a short laugh, but the sound broke in the middle. When? 8 months ago. Amara looked up. 8 months. She had still been living in the upstairs bedroom then. Still cooking her father's meals. Still driving him to appointments while Chinidu came by on weekends and talked about business from the doorway. He would have told me, Chinidu said. He was not required to. Afolabi placed the supporting registration record beside the deed. Your father completed the transfer through this office. The registration was finalized. The taxes and filing charges were paid. There is no pending signature and no unfinished conveyance. One of Amara's sisters leaned closer. So the house wasn't part of the estate when he died? Afolabi shook his head. Correct. It already belonged to Amara. The words changed the room more completely than any shout could have. Chinidu slowly sat down. His chair gave a dull leather groan beneath him. Amara's gaze moved to the brass keys. The same keys he had jingled in his hand while her suitcase sat in the street. The same gate he had closed in her face. The same house he had emptied, divided, and nearly offered to a buyer. No, Chinidu said. He pushed his palms against the table. She influenced him. Amara turned toward him. You said that yesterday. Because it is obvious. Then challenge the deed through the proper process, Afolabi said. But until a court says otherwise, the registered owner is sitting across from you. Chinidu looked at Amara now, not the lawyer. You knew. Amara's head moved once. I didn't. You lived there. So did Papa. You had access to him every day. Amara reached across the table and pulled the deed closer, stopping only when Afolabi released it. The paper felt thick beneath her fingertips, its embossed seal rough against her thumb. And you had access to the front gate, she said. Chinidu's jaw tightened. Don't do this. Do what? Pretend this makes what happened acceptable. Amara looked at him for several seconds. You mean what you did? Silence. Afolabi removed a second sheet from the file. There is another immediate issue. Chinidu glanced toward him. Because the property belonged to Amara before your father's death, you had no authority to exclude her from it, distribute items attached to it as though you controlled the premises, or represent yourself to a buyer as the person entitled to sell it. The real estate broker's empty chair seemed suddenly louder than anyone in the room. Chinidu rubbed one hand across his mouth. I believed it was family property. Belief does not create ownership. Afolabi said. Then he picked up the brass key ring and held it toward Amara. She did not take it immediately. Her eyes stayed on Chinedu. He had locked her outside in funeral clothes. He had thrown her belongings onto the pavement. He had told relatives she had already received her share simply because she cared for their father when others were busy. Now the keys hung less than 12 inches from her hand. Amara reached out. Metal settled into her palm, cool and heavy. Chinedu looked at the keys, then at his sister. Amara! She stood. The chair slid softly across the carpet. Afolabi placed a certified copy of the deed into a blue folder and handed it to her. You are entitled to take possession of your property immediately. Amara tucked the folder beneath her arm. At the conference room door, she stopped and turned back. The keys gave one quiet jingle in her hand. You told me I couldn't come back unless you allowed it. Chinedu said nothing. Amara opened the door. Now you'll come back only if I do. Chinedu was still sitting at the conference table when Barrister Afolabi placed one final envelope beside the deed and said, Your father left instructions for this to be read only after ownership was confirmed. The room had grown colder, or perhaps it only felt that way now that the brass keys were in Amara's hand. The air conditioner breathed steadily above them, and the sharp smell of cooling coffee mixed with the dry scent of old paper. Amara returned to her chair. Chinedu did not look at her. His thumb rubbed the pale mark on his wrist where their father's silver watch had rested days earlier. Afolabi opened the envelope carefully. No hidden contract came out. No second deed. Just a handwritten letter on 2 sheets of cream paper. This is not another transfer document, he said. It is an explanation. Chinedu gave a quiet scoff. Of course it is. Afolabi ignored him and began to read. Their father wrote that he had watched his children differently during the final years of his life. Some called when business was good. Some visited on holidays. Some asked about land, accounts, cars, and what would happen later. Amara never asked. She fixed leaking faucets. She argued with pharmacies when prescriptions were delayed. She sat beside him through hospital nights beneath fluorescent lights that buzzed until sunrise. She kept the generator fueled when power failed. She cooked when his appetite disappeared. And when he became too weak to climb the stairs, she moved her own things downstairs so he would not have to call for her twice. The room stayed silent except for the soft rasp of Afolabi turning the page. Their father's final paragraph was shorter. He wrote that the house should belong to the person who treated it as a home when everyone else treated it as an asset. He did not leave it to Amara because she was the youngest. He did not leave it to her because she sacrificed more. He left it to her because, in his words, she never once asked me what the house was worth while I was still living inside it. Amara lowered her eyes to the keys. The metal edges pressed into her palm. Across the table, Aunt Ngozi covered her mouth with one hand. Chinedu stood abruptly. His chair rolled back and struck the wall with a dull bump. He was sick, he said. He was angry. He didn't understand what he was doing. Afolabi folded the letter. He understood enough to complete a registered transfer months before his death. And she was there every day. Chinedu pointed at Amara. Every day. You expect me to believe she never said anything? Amara rose slowly. I didn't know. Stop saying that. I didn't know. Then why did he choose you? The question came louder this time. Amara stepped around the table. The carpet muffled her shoes, but the keys gave a faint metallic sound with every step. You just heard why. Chinedu looked toward the relatives as though searching for someone willing to interrupt. Nobody did. I was his son, he said. His eldest son. Amara stopped 6 feet away. And I was his daughter. Chinedu's jaw tightened. You think this means you won? Amara opened the blue folder and placed the certified deed on the table between them. No. It means you were wrong. Afolabi reached for another document. And there is still the matter of the attempted sale. Chinedu turned sharply. There was no sale. Because I stopped it before funds changed hands. Afolabi's voice remained flat. But you represented yourself as authorized to dispose of property registered to another person. The buyer has been notified. The broker has been notified. Any further attempt to transfer, encumber, lease, or remove fixtures from the residence without Amara's authorization will be documented immediately. Chinidu's fingers curled at his sides. So now she gets to throw us all out? Everyone looked at Amara. She looked back at the faces that had watched her suitcase hit the pavement after the funeral. Then she picked up the brass keys. No, Chinedu blinked. Amara continued, I'm not going to do to everyone what you did to me. His shoulders loosened by less than an inch. But you are not going back into that house today. The relief disappeared. Amara, you changed the locks. You removed my belongings. You tried to distribute Papa's things. You tried to sell property that was never yours. She placed one key between her thumb and forefinger. So before anyone enters that house again, I will inventory what remains, replace the lock you installed, and decide what belongs to the estate and what belongs to the property. Chinidu stared at her. You would lock me out? Amara closed her hand around the key. Until everything is accounted for. For the first time since the funeral, Chinidu had no key, no document, and no argument that could open the gate. The next morning, Amara stood before the black iron gate with the certified deed beneath her arm and a locksmith kneeling beside the brass lock Chinidu had installed after the funeral. Metal scraped against metal as the man loosened the plate, and the early sun warmed the cream-colored walls while the smell of machine oil mixed with dust and the last fading lilies inside the courtyard. Amara watched the old lock come free. It dropped into the locksmith's palm with a dull clink. 5 days earlier, that same lock had kept her outside with a suitcase at her feet. Now she held the only authorized set of replacement keys. Barrister Afolabi stood several feet behind her with an inventory clerk and a clipboard. Chinidu arrived just as the new lock clicked into place. He stopped beside the curb, holding a cardboard box against his chest. Their father's silver watch rested on top. I brought back what I took, he said. Amara looked at the watch, then at him. His shirt was wrinkled at the elbows, and there were no house keys hanging from his fingers. Everything? She asked. Chinidu nodded toward the trunk of his car. The watch, the cuff links, the jewelry I gave Aunt Ngozi. Emeka returned the SUV this morning. The trunk opened with a hydraulic hiss. Inside sat several velvet boxes, framed photographs, documents, and small items that had disappeared during the days Chinidu treated the house like property already divided. Amara stepped aside. Put them on the dining table. The clerk will record them. Chinidu looked through the open gate. Can I come in? For several seconds, only the locksmith's screwdriver clicked against the metal plate. Amara turned the new key once in her hand. Yes. Chinidu entered without speaking. The difference was small, but everyone felt it. He had once stood inside that gate deciding whether Amara could cross it. Now he waited for her permission. In the living room, sunlight fell across empty spaces where paintings had been removed. The ceiling fan pushed warm air carrying the smell of cardboard, polish, and old incense. One by one, Chinidu placed the returned items on the dining table. The inventory clerk called each item aloud and checked it off. Silver watch, gold cuff links, 2 jewelry boxes, property records, vehicle documents, family photographs. Amara walked upstairs while the list continued. Her bedroom door stood open. The shelves were nearly bare. She ran her fingers across the wooden desk, feeling the clean rectangle where her passport folder had once rested. Then she carried her 2 cardboard boxes back upstairs herself. No one carried them for her. No one needed to. At the bottom of the stairs, Chinidu waited. Amara. She stopped halfway down. I was wrong. His voice did not travel far in the large room. About the deed? About more than the deed. Amara continued down until they stood several feet apart. Chinedu looked toward the front gate. When Papa died, I thought being the eldest meant I had to take control before anyone else could. He swallowed. Then when Afolabi questioned the papers, I kept pushing because admitting I might be wrong felt worse than what I was doing. Amara said nothing. Chinedu rubbed his thumb across his empty wrist. I locked you out of your own house. The inventory clerk's pen scratched softly across paper behind them. Yes, Amara said. Chinedu looked at her.
I'm sorry.
She held his gaze. I accept the apology. But an apology does not erase what happened. He nodded once. I know. You will return anything else that belongs here. You will not represent this property as yours. And you will not make decisions for me because you are older, louder, or more certain. Chinedu lowered his eyes. Understood. Amara walked to the front door and removed the funeral wreath that still hung beside it. The flowers had browned along the edges, and dry petals broke beneath her fingers as she carried it outside. She placed it gently beside the curb, then returned to the doorway. By afternoon, the SUV was back in the driveway. The missing paintings were stacked safely against the wall. Every remaining item had been recorded. Barrister Afolabi handed Amara the final inventory sheet and left with the clerk. Chinedu paused at the gate before going. Will I be welcome here again? Amara looked past him at the street where her suitcase had landed days earlier. As my brother, yes. As the man who thinks this house belongs to him, no. Chinedu nodded and stepped outside. Amara closed the gate, but she did not lock it behind him. She walked back through the courtyard, opened the front door, and placed the certified deed in her father's wooden box. Then she set the new keys beside it. The house was quiet now except for the slow turning of the ceiling fan and the soft hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Amara stood in the center of the home her family had thrown her out of, surrounded not by victory speeches or revenge, but by the simple proof her father had left behind. Chinedu had believed power was holding the key and deciding who stayed outside. In the end, Amara learned that the strongest person was the one whose name was already on the door.